Thank you. Welcome to everybody who's here in person today and everybody on Zoom today, and also everybody who watches this recording in the future. We're just so happy that you're here and joining this conversation with us. So, I'm Stephanie Miller, and I'm a postdoc here at Gladstone. I use pronouns she, her, and also they, them. Specifically, I'm a postdoc in the lab for a Pellup in the Gladstone Institute of Neurological Disease, where we study Alzheimer's disease, and I use systems neuroscience to do that work, which I love. So as I mentioned, Gladstone is hosting our event today, and Gladstone is specifically an independent biomedical research institution here in San Francisco that is really focused on overcoming disease. And so it's really great for me to have come from a more fundamental research background and to now be in a place that's really focused on applications that are going to help people as soon as possible. So I myself am a queer, non-binary, mixed race person of Latina descent. And I have worked for many years to support the LGBTQ plus community, including a focus on transgender advocacy. So I'm glad to continue that tradition with you all today. And this is, I think, our third consecutive year, hosting this event. Oh, it's actually my third consecutive year. This event has preceded me for many years. Gladstone and UCSF together have hosted this event, but actually it's my third year moderating, which is a great privilege. And just want to let you guys know that I think we can all make contributions in different ways. And I noticed that this is a thing that when we're done, I'm going to feel even more energy than I did when we started. And so I just want to have that be one of the ways that I can help to serve our community. Now let's get started with Out in Science specifically. So Out in Science is a panel discussion with academic leaders and STEM professionals that explores the lives and careers of LGBTQ plus scientists. So this annual event has been organized since 2014 by the LGBTQ plus community group here at Gladstone in close collaboration with the LGBT Resource Center at University of California, San Francisco, which you'll hear me refer to as UCSF. So our theme this year is being queer in a digital age, which has been true for a long time, but feels especially true these days. So specifically, social media platforms have made it easier to connect with people who share your beliefs, your values, and identity. But it can, these platforms can help us combat isolation by helping us connect and get support from a broader community than necessarily is in our specific geographic location. However, online platforms not only offer the opportunity to connect and to find mentors, especially as scientists, but it can also sometimes open the door to getting trolled or having to hear hate speech or other negative experiences. So that'll be part of our conversation today. So today we're going to have 4 amazing panelists who are going to talk to us about their unique experiences and career paths. And they're going to share their thoughts on the benefits and challenges of having a strong online presence and being out in science. So after a brief land acknowledgement, I'm going to introduce our panelists and I'll moderate the panel discussion. And we're going to save time at the end for your questions. So you can all have an opportunity to take part in this conversation. People who are in person are encouraged to raise their hands and ask. People who are on Zoom can submit, and we have someone in the room here who is going to be able to ask your questions on your behalf. And by the way, people who are on Zoom, there's also an option to ask questions anonymously if that's something that you would like to do. So before we get started, I'm going to share a few housekeeping notes. In this discussion, we're going to use the term queer, or let me speak for myself, I'm going to use the terms queer and LGBTQ+ to refer to our very broad and diverse community. And so I want to be clear that I'm seeking to be inclusive of all gender, sexual, and relationship diverse people, including asexual people, two-spirit people, and same-gender loving people, and all people who have been historically and currently marginalized on the basis of who they are. So as I mentioned, this event is being live streamed on Zoom and also Facebook Live, and it's also being recorded. So the recording will be available later, specifically on Gladstone's YouTube channel, where you can also find previous years Out in Science discussions. If you are on Zoom, we've also enabled closed captioning with live transcription to make this event more accessible. So you can turn that on and off using the Zoom live transcription box at the bottom of the screen. If you're in person, of course, you can ask your questions in person. And we'll certainly try to answer as many of the questions as we can. Also, if you're online, feel free to use that chat and to make connections. We're going to have a reception after this event. And so that'll give us a chance, those of us who are here in person, or even people who conceivably might be upstairs in the lab right now, but who are going to be able to come down for the reception. That'll give us all a chance to connect together, which is a big part of having these events. And so I just want to encourage people who are exclusively on Zoom to use that chat and perhaps connect together. And also, if you're going to share this on social media, please use hashtag #OutInScience, and that way we can help promote and connect there. So this brings us to the land acknowledgement portion of our event. So we're going to begin with a few minutes to acknowledge the Ramaytush Ohlone people, who are the traditional custodians of the San Francisco Peninsula, which is where Gladstone's building is located. So I'd like to introduce Kanyon Sayers-Roods. To help us acknowledge the land in a respectful manner, we've invited Kanyon, who also goes by their native name, Coyote Woman, and uses they, them, and she, her pronouns. Kanyon is the co-founder and CEO of Kanyon Consulting and very involved in the Native community. Kanyon is also an artist, poet, published author, activist, student, and teacher. The daughter of Anne Marie Sayers, she was raised in Indian Canyon, land trust of her family, which is currently one of the few spaces in Central California available for the Indigenous community for ceremony. So Kanyon, thank you very much for being with us today, and I'd like to invite you to the podium.
Mishmin Tuhis, Conrakat Kanyon, Coyote Woman, Sayers-Roods. Yes, I do talk to coyotes, and being raised on the land of my ancestors, I always follow what is called Indigenous Protocol. Indigenous Protocol is by honoring and acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of whose land and of the peoples and histories of the original stewards that we are on today. I come from Indian Canyon Nation, which is a little further south of here. I speak the Mutsun language. So right here, right now, I want us all to acknowledge this land. So can I hear you say Yalamu? Yalamu. Can I hear you say Ramaytush? Ramaytush. And then I'm going to invite you to speak my language. Ama Pititakawas. Ama Pititakawas. And apologies for anyone suffering with the closed captioning. My words are never transcribed properly. You're acknowledging the first words and the first languages of this land. Yalamu is this place, the village. Before San Francisco, before this place was known as California, this place was known as Yalamu, and the first language was Ramaytush. In my language, Ama Pititakawas means people of this land. And people of this land, we honor the indigenous peoples of this land, and we here are together as community, being good ancestors in training as community of this land. My mother and my grandmother taught me that when song, ceremony, and dancing stops, so does the earth. I too believe that. So I want to offer a song. And I want to offer a little hummingbird song to honor our hummingbirds, the pollinators, and the first people, the plants and the animals, the first beings before us. And settler science doesn't always include holistic pedagogy. So I want to acknowledge and honor our first people before us. And humunya in my language means hummingbird. Humunya, 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 weha, weha. Humunya, 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 weha, weha, hu. Humunya, 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 weha, weha. Humunya, 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 weha, weha, hu. Humunya, 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 weha, weha. Humunya, 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 weha, weha, hu. Can I get a collective oh? Oh. Send those prayers out in a good way. Being in community together in a good way is one way that we are uniting. Don't forget to sing. Don't forget to dance. And we are all in prayer. Just because you can't commodify it doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing it. Oh.
Thank you, Kanyon, so much for these important and really resonant comments and song. All right, I'd like to move us forward now to welcoming some of our panelists today. So I'm going to start by introducing each of our 4 panelists, and I'm going to ask them why it's important for them to be out in science, and then we'll get into the heart of our discussion. So we're going to begin with Dr. Jamie Lee Twist Schroeder. So Dr. Schroeder uses she, her pronouns. Jamie is a radiologist specializing in cardiothoracic imaging and an assistant professor at UCSF. She was previously a staff radiologist at the Stanford-affiliated VA hospital. She holds a bachelor's and a master's degree from Stanford University, DPhil from the University of Oxford, and an MD from Johns Hopkins. She has published on topics including clinical radiology, cardiovascular disease, and novel imaging technologies. She's also a 2-time Olympian on Team USA in 2004 and 2008, and lives here in San Francisco with her wife and their 4 children. So Jamie, we're thrilled to have you on the panel. Please come up and join us. Yes. Thank you. And so please get us started with this initial prompt of why is it important to be out in science?
Thank you, Stephanie. I think it's important to be out in science because I think it's important to be out everywhere. I'm inspired by Harvey Milk, of course, who was the kind of pioneer of this idea that being out is the first step into being accepted and to, restoring our rights in this kind of cisnormative and patriarchal society that we found ourselves in, and that we have to be out in order to live our truth and in order to make connections and allies across kind of this LGBTQ umbrella. So I'm very happy to be part of this event today.
Thank you very much. Wonderful. All right, that brings me to Wendy Runyon. So our next panelist is Wendy, who uses she, her pronouns. We're happy to have Wendy actually as a last-minute addition to our panel to substitute in for Elena Chin, who unfortunately was not able to join us here today. So Wendy is a research scientist here at Gladstone, actually, working in the stem cell core, where she provides services and training in iPS cells, in addition to managing a shared tissue culture facility. And these are all essential services for the work that we do here at Gladstone. So before joining Gladstone, she worked as a production specialist at Cellular Dynamics International, which is now Fujifilm Cellular Dynamics in Madison, Wisconsin, where she manufactured a variety of iPSC-derived cell products. So she earned her bachelor's degree in biology from Northland College and was born and raised actually here in the Bay Area and is a proud member of the LGBTQ plus community. So Wendy, why don't you join us here on the stage? So happy to have you today. And let me prompt you, why do you think it's important to be out in science?
Thank you for that introduction, Steph. I think it's important to be out in science, first of all, for my own mental health. I don't want to be hiding who I am. That's really stressful and not something I want to be doing. And it's also important for the other queer folks, especially those who may not feel comfortable coming out in their workplace, to know that we're here, we're visible, and they're not alone.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Next up, we have Ron Buckmire, who is a professor of mathematics at Occidental College in LA, who uses he, him pronouns. Ron received a PhD in mathematics from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, also known as RPI, and has served as a program director at the National Science Foundation twice. In 2023, he was named a Fellow of the Society for Industrial and Applied Mathematics, the first person from a small liberal arts college, the fourth Black person, and the first openly queer person to receive this prestigious honor. So Ron, please join us up here on the stage. Thank you very much for being a panelist today, and please start us off by letting us know, why do you think it's important for you to be out in science?
Thanks for that intro, Steph. I think it's important to be out in science because I think we don't want to waste time trying to hide. It's just a lack of, it offends my sense of efficiency that instead of energy being spent on improving mathematics or science, proving theorems, creating code, that instead people will be spending time sort of not being able to live their truth and sort of optimize the way they go throughout the world. So being out allows people to flourish, and I think everyone should be able to flourish and be who they are in what they do.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. All right, and that brings us to our fourth panelist, Bonnie Maven, who uses pronouns she, her, and also they, them. Bonnie is a computational biologist who applies her expertise of bioinformatics and stem cell biology to the exciting field of immuno-oncology. They received their PhD in developmental and stem cell biology right here at Gladstone Institutes and UCSF, studying how the heart develops. Bonnie is also passionate about advocacy and is generally an open book. This is true when talking about her own experiences of being queer and disabled in science. So Bonnie, please join us on the stage. It's great to have you back at Gladstone today, Bonnie. And would you please let us know why you think it's important to be out in science?
Absolutely. Okay. Hi. So there are two reasons why I really think it's important for me personally to be out in science. And one has kind of been reiterated by everybody, but just being true to our authentic selves. This is who I am, and I'm grateful and privileged that I'm in an area where I feel comfortable being open with that at my workplace. And I think that's really important. The second reason is visibility. I grew up in a place where there weren't really anybody visible that were queer. And so I want to provide that for the future of scientists going forward. And so for those reasons, I'm very proud to be out in science.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. All right. So we're going to get started in our first question section. And we're going to start by exploring trajectories in, STEM, which of course is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics careers, and the unique challenges that may be faced by being open with our queer identities and how those may shape our professional paths. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to address each question initially to one panelist, but I very much encourage people to then jump in before we move to the next question, popcorn style. And also if anybody has a thought that they want to come back to later, that's also totally cool. Plus we'll have Q&A from the audience later. So just to get us started, Wendy. When did you decide to come out in STEM and what factored into that decision?
I can't say that there
is it. Oh, okay, we're good.
I can't say that there was like one time that I decided to come out in STEM. Coming out is a never-ending process. So it never ends. It was a process for me too. I actually didn't come out in the workplace as asexual until I was here at Gladstone almost 6 years ago. And not because I was trying to hide that fact, but because I didn't realize it myself. For a long time, I identified as only a lesbian because I didn't really realize that you could be both. And once I figured that out, a lot of things became a lot more clear. You know what they say about hindsight. The things that factored into that decision, I think the biggest one was safety. I worked a bunch of food service jobs during college and before getting my first job in STEM. And I was never out in any of those workplaces just because I didn't feel safe. One of my waitressing jobs, actually on the first day of work, the person training me said, "I hate lesbians." And I did not come out in that workplace. So getting my first job in STEM was really the first place that I felt safe enough to be myself.
Thank you very much for sharing. I'm going to pivot to Bonnie for your first question, which is going to be, scroll. I already know. How do you decide whether to move into academia or industry? And also, how does your identity inform the way that you do your science in those contexts?
Thank you for asking this question, Steph. So I am going to really answer mostly focus on the second part of how does my identity influence my science? That was the second one, right? Mm-hmm. I'm going to flip it and say, how does science influence my identity? And more so how it influenced my figuring out who I am. And just to say that I became a scientist first before I realized that I was a part of this community. And so I really attribute the trainings in science of really making sure that I think about things critically to applying that in my day-to-day life and really thinking critically about how I was raised and the way I was raised and whether that is really being true to myself. And so that was really important for me to really begin to question my identity. And I don't think I've said it yet, but I identify, or I am omnisexual as well as non-binary. And so both of those pieces of my identity were discovered after becoming a scientist. And then to answer the other one of industry versus academia, I think that's a much longer answer, honestly. I have most of the experience in academia, but I'm now in industry. And I think there's a lot of differences between the two. And I don't want to overgeneralize, but I have a lot of feelings and I'm definitely happy to share after this event if you have more specific questions. But one day, I think I'll be able to answer that question in a lot better with a lot more experience. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll also mention here, all of our panelists are fantastic connections. Just want to recommend everybody in the audience today, whether online or here in person, to make that connection, including like a LinkedIn message or anything like that. I just want to encourage us to all avail ourselves of the incredible wisdom that we have here in the room today. Ron, next question for you. So as a member of the queer community, do you see challenges to gaining leadership roles?
Yeah, I was thinking about that question. And I think actually being out as a gay man has been helpful in some areas. So for example, when I was invited to become a program director at the National Science Foundation, that was the same year I was awarded the 2011 LGBT Educator of the Year award. And, you know, I told them, and they were like, great. There was no issue whatsoever. You know, I'm going to work for the federal government. And so in some sense, I think, you know, having a rainbow tint, brings out makes you sort of stand out in a crowded field of applicants. At least that's been my experience in certain situations, like working for the federal government. So it hasn't really been a challenge. I was trying to think of areas in which it has been. I could talk about the whole, it was a challenge sort of during the tenure process, but we'll see if we get there in academia.
Great, thank you very much. And also another just quick mention I want to make is that sometimes you're good. Sometimes I may be asking questions and I may preface it by saying, like, as a member of the queer community, I just want to acknowledge that we all belong to many communities. And so to the extent that there are sort of interactions there, you know, always feel free to speak to how those things come together to affect our lives. Jamie. So as a member of the LGBTQ+ community, what are some of the unique challenges or pressures you may have faced in your career, and how did you overcome them?
That's an interesting question. I think echoing some of what Wendy said, this is not my first career, really. I kind of had a career in sports before I had a career in science, so they were pretty simultaneous. I did my 2 runs for the Olympics when I was in training for being a scientist and for being doing my pre-med classes as an undergraduate, as a graduate student. Coming out in sport was way harder. It's a very hostile environment, and more so in men's sports because I'm transgender, and at the time I was presenting male and competing in male sports. And I think that in science, it's been easier. Being out has not been so much of a choice because I transitioned during my residency and during my training. But that was, you know, I've been almost 10 years now since I finished medical school, and it's been wonderful to be out in science. Both my community here at UCSF and at Stanford have been supportive. That said, I don't feel it's entirely ever safe to be out. I feel like in some ways the trans people in particular are still considered a fair target, and fair to be demonized and fair to have our healthcare restricted. And I think as scientists in particular, we have a responsibility to speak out against that, and we have the credentials to be taken seriously when we do. And so I think that it's important to be out, and it's a challenge. It's not so much in my own work, but I think it's a hostile environment in general in this country and in many others. And it's been really a privilege to have a platform and to have people's trust as their physician, as well as being a scientist in an institution that has support like UCSF does to kind of try to address those in whatever small way I can.
Thank you very much. So I'm now going to move on to the next topic in our questions. So this is on mentors and role models. So representation clearly is important in STEM, because when you can see your identity reflected in your mentors and in the leaders of your organizations, it can help you see your future self in those same positions. I know that even myself, I know that having openly out role models has been really crucial in my own professional journey, which I'm happy to talk about in the reception. So once again, panelists, welcome to jump in on questions. So let's begin. Ron, have you had any out role models earlier in your career, and how did this affect your career?
Yes. So I've been at Occidental College since 1994, maybe since before some of you were born. And there, I actually got that job because when I was a grad student, I was visiting my boyfriend, now husband, in LA, and I was just at an event, and the chairman of the Occidental College Math Department was there, and he said, "Oh, when you graduate, you might want to consider." We have this minority postdoc, and it's called Minority Postdoctoral Scholar in Residence, and it comes with a free residence. So that I remember that and applied. And so he actually became a great mentor of mine. His name is Don Goldberg. And there were other openly gay professors in the math department. At one point, there were 5 of us in a department of 11 people. And so he became chair of the math department. He became an associate dean. He went off and became a dean at someplace else. And so I've sort of seen his career and sort of wanted to replicate that. So that was me having openly gay mentors. And because of that, more recently, I've been trying to mentor younger openly queer PhDs. 2 of my mentors one graduated this year, another one graduated a couple years ago, but they just got their first tenure track jobs, and I was sort of helping them through that process and sort of happy to serve as a resource. And I did mention earlier, but sort of one of the reasons why I think it's important to be out in STEM is really to sort of be representative, to show people that, yes, you can do these things and perhaps be recognized, so that people can say, oh, yes, there's at least one out LGBT fellow at SIAM, or there's at least one out whatever it is. I mean, sometimes it sort of does suck sort of to be the first, but as Vice President Harris says, I may be the first, but I'm not going to be the last. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Now, Bonnie, I'd like to ask you what advice or tips you have for early career scientists on finding mentors or building networks of mentors, and specifically how you think social media can help, especially for finding people who might not be local to you.
Absolutely. I'd love to answer this question. So the idea of networking can be a very scary word, especially if you're an introvert like me. And everyone's always like, you need to be networking to get your next job or to get connections. And that is, I will say, true to an extent. But I think what helped me become comfortable with networking is figuring out the best way I network. And that is one-on-one in a Zoom meeting with somebody. I have found, just through trial and error, I'm going to have the best time talking to the person, the best conversation in that scenario. And sometimes that's because it's easier for me to write notes, or I can Google things that I don't know during the conversation. Second best is still one-on-one, but over coffee. Third best, and on the very bottom, is in group settings, where a lot of the networking events take place these days. And so I would urge you to really consider where you can find your best, where you can thrive in the best way to figure out or to learn more about someone else and have these conversations that are considered networking. The other thing is that If you didn't get a response from an email from someone that you would love to network with, send that email again. It is not a reflection on how they feel about you. They are just busy. And so really, I would encourage you to send that message again, send that email again. You never know what opportunity might be lost if you do not do that. And so I'd really encourage you to do that. And the third thing I think about is that, go ahead and add me on LinkedIn, but also LinkedIn is a great tool that you can see the other people that I know. And there's not been a time in my life where I've denied introducing someone to someone else that I know. That is super easy for me to do. I don't need to know that much about you, just a little bit of snippet of why you would want to meet someone I know. And then boom, it's really easy for me to send that email out. And so I'd really encourage you to try to think positively about networking, try to figure out the best way that's easiest for you to network. And then also don't be afraid to try again, to email again. And yeah, that's my advice.
Do any other panelists have thoughts on this particular question? No.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. And I would also encourage you, maybe not in the first email, but at least in the second email, sort of to also be explicit about that you are looking for, what kind of mentoring relationship you're looking for, or what exactly. So you just want to get to know someone because you see that, I have an interest in data science and social justice, and so do you. Actually, just recently, I got an email out of the blue about I'm organizing this workshop at in Providence at Brown, and I got an email, and we ended up writing a paper together, which actually just got revised and resubmit. But anyway, I didn't know him at all, but he, we did a lot of it was a pretty fast turnaround for this paper, like 4 weeks. But yeah, he was great, and so yeah, it can really happen. Just send out an email.
Absolutely. I'd also actually like to plug a couple of resources for people in the room who might be interested. One includes NRMN, which is the National Research Mentor Network, something like that, maybe even exactly that, which is a way that you can, like, as a student or as a mentor, sign up, and then it'll help match you with someone who has, like, similar interests to help, get these mentorships started. Specifically for our community, I also recommend OSTEM. OSTEM stands for Out in STEM. It's at this point a national organization that has chapters at most major universities, which is fantastic to see. It was not the case when I was in college a little bit ago, but it was really cool to see actually it grow. I think starting in like 2013 or something, it first got started, and now it's really quite prolific. And it's actually recently, I think, joined forces with an organization with a funny name, which is called NOGLSTEP, which actually stands for the National Organization of Gay and Lesbian Scientists and Technical Professionals, trademarked many years ago, but actually is a fully inclusive organization. It's really actually was the organization for, like, I'm going to go ahead and say adults, like professionals, as opposed to university student groups. But now, at long last, these organizations now come together for an annual meeting, which is called Out to Innovate. So takeaway here, Google Out to Innovate, a fantastic annual conference where people come together to not talk about like science on like the queer science per se, but where like LGBTQ plus people come together to talk about their science in general. One of these like diversity science conferences that has been really important in my own career trajectory, having attended that a few times. So I definitely encourage students and anybody who's at like an ERG who could get institutional support to attend these events is a really good investment of time, I would recommend, and a place to find mentors. Oh, yes.
So NOGLSTEP is, that was the organization that gave me the Educator of the Year award. They've actually, I think they've changed their name to be actually Out to Innovate now. Another resource, I believe they have some kind of connection with another online mentoring group called MentorNet. Yeah, but and also OSTEM, I believe, has a ongoing scholarship program that's due June 30th. Just Google OSTEM LGBT scholarship for students. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ron. Okay, so moving to the next question. So I'm gonna start this with Jamie, but I'd also love for Wendy, you to respond as well. So I'm wondering if being part of this community changes the way that you do mentor or relate to your coworkers or manage other people of other identities. Especially curious if it gives you some insight into perhaps the experience of being the people who might be marginalized in other ways. Just curious if this influences how you interact with your coworkers, colleagues, and mentees.
A strong yes, it does. And I think that the experience mostly of coming out and of kind of unpacking my privilege knapsack and giving up a few of them, that experience certainly opens your eyes to all sorts of experiences that you might not have even paid attention to or known about, and hopefully will make anyone in this community acknowledge the importance of intersectionality, that you can be part of you have many forms of marginalization or many forms of have differences in experience. And the number one takeaway is that you have to listen to people that have had different experiences, and their particular experience is their experience and is valid. And so it's given me that perspective whenever I meet people that are out, or for whatever reason have found me as a mentor figure, including my children, because I don't know their experience, and times change and their experience change, and the way they experience sexuality and gender in society will be very different from my experience. And I don't want to push my kind of narratives in my own mind, or that have been carried unhelpfully forward from past generations of trauma into their experience of sexuality and gender. But at the same time, I'd like to just hear their perspectives and be able to offer my own in a humble way.
Snaps. Thank you. Yeah, same question, Wendy.
All right, it's going to be hard to follow that, but I mean, I'm sure the answer is yes. I mean, it's human nature to be able to empathize more with things we can relate to. But on the other side, I also hope I would still be an empathetic, caring, thoughtful person without my marginalized identities, because we don't even have to understand other people's differences to be able to accept their differences. And we don't have to have been labeled as different to understand other people's differences. And I also feel like if more people understood that, then we wouldn't be having some of the problems in our community where we're just fighting for the right to exist and basic human rights.
Yep. I'm now going to shift to Bonnie. Do you have any specific advice you might give to a young trans and or non-binary scientist today?
I think a lot of the advice was kind of, I'm going to just echo from what I just earlier said, and just to reach out to others, to communicate with them and build communities of people you can talk to. I think that when I am really struggling with anything in my career, I have specific people that I can reach out to and talk to, and I fully trust them to hold whatever secrets I'm going to tell them. And I really appreciate having those people. I think identifying those people and building those relationships is really important. And I think it's important to there's been so many friendships and relationships in my life that I feel like I've kind of just let go because I haven't reached out to them in a while. But it's so easy now in the digital age just to send a quick message and just hop on Zoom or hop on a phone call and get to know them. And so get to know them again, I guess. And so I think that's my advice, is just, especially in the digital age, it can both be easier to not hang out with people anymore, but it also, you should try to make the effort to maintain those connections, because those people can help you out so much and they can offer such great, real advice. The other suggestion I'd have is that, I have a lot, but another suggestion is that, and I'm openly happy to admit this, I see a therapist every single week, and I can't tell you how amazing that is. And I'm thankful that I can afford it. But I don't know where I would be without a therapist. Every single week, I make that commitment every single morning of a certain day every week. And I talk about it to others. And I say, you can't schedule me for a meeting that day. I have another very critical meeting. And so I think that's so important if you're able to fit that into your life and into your finances.
Absolutely. I often think about therapy as sort of like a mental health insurance, which doesn't really exist, but actually it can work that way for us individually. I'd actually now love to ask Jamie, do you have any advice for trans or non-binary med students?
Well, it would be a similar advice to any med student, which is good luck. Medical school, in fact, during the pandemic has become even more popular with a young generation that's been essentially traumatized by a global health scare of epic proportions, which is wonderful because medicine and science as well, and the science of medicine needs as many bright minds as we can possibly entice into it. That said, I was not out in as trans when I was a medical student. I was very closeted. I started my transition during medical school, but in secret. And I was at a medical school that taught very transphobic ideas that classified transgender or transgender behaviors, cross-dressing behaviors as the pathology rather than society as having the defect that was causing us distress. But in general, I would say if you are in an institution that has these sorts of ideas, you might not be able to change them in your, as from the status of being a medical student. You need to potentially look further afield and find mentors in these other sorts of through networks, things like OSTEM, things like cold calling people on your LinkedIn profile, or as a result of seeing this webinar or whatever it is. That you need to find people that can support you, that can see you for who you are, and that will reduce kind of what Ron described as this kind of fog of having to explain yourself all the time, and get that out of the way and find someone who will accept you as you, and then you can go and really bring your full self, and you will need your full self and your full effort to pursue a career in medicine as much as you need to be the top of your best contributions in science as well.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. All right, great. So now I'm going to move on to our second section. I think that was a great segue, which is about allies and support systems. And so specifically, it's not enough for LGBTQ plus people to be supporting each other and advocating for ourselves. We also need support from allies. And so these can be individuals as well as organizations, all of which play a crucial role in creating environments that are inclusive and accessible and tailored to our unique needs. So I'm going to begin, actually, Jamie, again, but can you please share how you think as queer people, we can advocate for everyone in our community, including people who may not have all the same privileges and access that we do?
Well, it's of course, a very big question. You could write a whole thesis on it or spend a whole career on it, but I'll speak from personal experience. And I found the most support when national organizations, physician organizations that are writing their guidelines have very pro-trans, explicitly pro-trans and pro-LGBTQ policies in ways that will enhance our health as individuals, let alone enable us to have our most successful careers. So the example I would share with you is a statement by the American Academy of Pediatrics, which was, our number one pediatrics. They've had lots of great statements, and they're I think a very forward-thinking organization with regard to LGBTQ rights. But what for me personally was the most resonant was their policy on promoting breastfeeding and promoting breastfeeding for non-birthing parents, for transgender women, for transgender non-binary people, chest feeding, for our health and for the health of our children, and to not make it only a cis woman kind of experience. And I was able to have both this institution behind me that when I went to my doctor and said, I want to breastfeed my child a few years ago, and had the support to do that, and has been a wonderful experience for me. You might not see the individual impact that you might have in statements like this when you're talking about, you're just putting kind of these committees get put together and have to make these kind of exceptionally boring debates about the kind of exact words you're going to use in a statement. They have real meaning in the end, because when you're crafting national policy and crafting national guidelines, when it comes to the stamp of these institutions, is similar the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, the National Hospitals Administrators. I've worked on other communities or read their work and used that to go to my own institution and say, this seems like you should be doing something differently, and they really turn around and listen. So those sort of guidelines, I think, are incredibly important, and an incredible way to be an ally to the LGBTQ plus community is to make sure those guidelines you've thought about them in the context of how they will affect queer people. And when you have those guidelines in your favor, it is one more tool that you can use to kind of make change wherever you are.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. I did not know about that. I'm so curious to hear how this progress gets made. Thank you for that bit of insight. I think it's also really powerful because even though not everyone has children, we all have a stake in the wellness of children in our country and in the world, and on the health of families. And it sounds like this is an important part of that. So that's really great to learn about. Thank you. I'd love to actually ask Bonnie a similar question. Oh, please. No, go.
Oh, I just wanted to second my vote on doing the boring committee work. For example, so was recently appointed the Vice President for Equity, Diversity, Inclusion at SIAM, which is the largest international association of applied mathematicians. And so in that role, I've been trying to establish policies. I actually just published a piece a couple days ago in what's called the Notices of the American Mathematical Society with 6 other people, some of them who are my mentees. And it's about, because a lot of people don't know what they can do. So this article is about on best practices for supporting LGBTQ mathematicians. And it talks about what departments can do, what organizations can do, and what you can do on a personal level. And I think that article will be really useful to departments in the future that they want to do the right thing, but they don't actually know what to do. So that's on one level. And also when these organizations are trying to develop policies, they're also often clueless. And so they need members of the LGBTQ community to sort of step up and sort of be parts of these committees, to write the statements, to, look for the semicolons and to make sure that the policy that they're enacting is actually going to help LGBTQ people to thrive in the future.
Absolutely. And just really quickly, right in between you two, I think that it's important that none of us need to speak for any group that we don't feel comfortable speaking for. So if you've been invited into a room to represent a community, perhaps the LGBTQ plus community, your experience is not monolithic. And so it is always your prerogative to say to the people in that room, thank you for having me, bringing me in here. I need more people here. So that we can really represent this community, so that we can design these policies that are going to be most effective. Bonnie.
What was my question?
The question was, great question. The question was, how can we advocate for everyone in our community?
Same question. Okay. I'll keep it short, but honestly, one thing that I have realized is that each time I learn a new piece of my identity, or maybe I become close to someone with a different identity than I have, I realized there's a lot that I don't know. So when I became disabled years ago, there was a lot I didn't know about the struggles of people with disabilities that my mind is more open to it now, but it was sad that there was a lot I didn't know. And so I just, as a quick example, one way that I try to combat this and try to learn more of others is that with the wonderful world of internet, there are so many profiles out there to follow for people who grew up differently or have even different views. And so just as an example, I actually follow a number of really amazing transracial adoptees on Instagram and listen to their stories with an open mind and an open heart. And I have learned so much. And I would never necessarily ask anyone around me if they're a transracial adoptee. And so I don't have that perspective in my life, but these people online are so graceful to talk about their experiences of growing up. And so that's just one example of ways that I try to see how other people are living this life and difficulties they might have, because there's definitely a lot out there, a lot of struggles out there that I'm still blind to, and I'd like to change that.
That's also great because it lets you know if someone did come to you with a question that's like not something that you yourself could speak to, you'd know who to say.
Absolutely. I will be like, I know who you can hire for like a 1-hour session if you really want to talk about this in more detail. And a lot of these people I follow are very open to that, and never ask them to work for free. That is super important. Never ask them to give up their time for free.
We're having such a great discussion that we're actually running in such a way that I'm going to condense a few questions. We're just fine, but I'm just going to mention that I'm going to start to combine a few questions. So what I would love to ask is, I'd love to, so our final question section is going to be this being queer in this digital age. And so I'm going to try to connect those all together. So I think I'm going to start with Wendy. How do you think that organizations can be more inclusive and supportive for, in this case, the LGBTQ plus community, and specifically in terms of their policies and in terms of their like policies related to digital platforms and how they can be raising awareness or make their own positions known and clear?
I mean, visibility is a great first step. I love in June when I see all the rainbow stuff. I'm like, yes, I'm seeing, but that's a first step. Don't just slap a rainbow over your logo in June and call that good enough. Actually, every organization is different. So talk to your LGBTQ plus employees and ask them what they need, and actually listen to them and take action on what they say. Performative allyship is pretty close to useless at best and can be actively hurtful if the people who are supposedly speaking in your best interest are just doing it for the accolades and not to actually support the people that they're advocating for. And then I would say one big thing, especially in these days, if you're a conference organizer, don't hold conferences in locations where anti-LGBTQ laws are in place, and speak up about why you're not holding them in those locations.
Absolutely. I also want to thank you, Wendy, as you mentioned the term performative allyship, you then defined it, which is really helpful sometimes, especially when we're talking to each other. We get really deep in our own jargon, but especially like, you know, in conversations like this, but even with each other, sometimes you have a different definition of a term and you don't realize it. And miscommunication could happen. So yeah, we should always practice really being clear about what we mean. Okay, cool, great, thank you. Do any other panelists have a thought on this topic? If not, I'll move on. Okay, so as I mentioned, our next section is about this digital age. So specifically social media platforms, but also in general, however it feels most relevant. So these platforms can help us connect with people, find mentors, as we described, feel less isolated, but can also open the door to negative experiences. And I actually don't even mean just negative experiences from people who are jerks. Sometimes we don't use the internet in ways that are most healthy, just us ourselves. So let's also consider that as some of the downsides of this digital age. I think I'll begin with Bonnie. Do you have any tips on how to build community with queer scientists, and which platforms specifically do you use to do that?
I'd love to answer this question, but first I'm going to bring it down a notch and just talk about the seriousness of safety on the internet. I urge you all to Google your own name in an incognito browser without any cookies and see if it can come across your address. Because unless you've done anything to specifically obscure that information, your home address is there on the internet connected to your name. And that is really scary information for the wrong people to have. And I won't go into the triggering details, but someone close to me had a physical threat on their life because he upset the wrong person online. And so these are real threats. And so I say this not to scare you away from using the internet in all the wonderful ways it can bring you community, but just to urge you to be safe about it and consider that there are people out there that would want to cause you harm, as awful as that is, but that is the reality. For my own use of the internet, if I usually just use it in only a few platforms, like if I'm on Reddit, I use a completely anonymous username that I change every so often so that to try to limit me being tracked. On Facebook, I have an obscured name, but I still don't really talk about anything that could be considered really controversial. I think there are safe places such as, for instance, if you can find a Discord community where it's very limited, limited user memberships. And that is where you'll find the best chance of having a safe space. But I just want to urge you caution, not just on your mental health side using the internet, but honestly, also your physical side. I hate that I have to say that, but I did really just want to make that clear.
Thank you. Yeah. I wonder, Jamie, if you have any experience using social media to build these online communities.
Broadly, no. I've avoided social media. I think it's been too hostile a place, and it's not worth, again, the physical dangers I feel are very real. Not so much that I'd be willing to bear them myself, but having a family, I would never want to do anything that would put them at risk. So at the same time, I think that they're powerful tools. I would say that they're designed not so much to for us to build community and to do great things. They're designed to make their investors money, and they're not designed with our mental health in mind whatsoever. And so any people, I think you should keep that in mind. There are incredible network effects, not just networking, but just the mathematical network effects of, of kind of logarithmic growth and about exponential reach and things that you can have that are enabled by these sort of user-generated content platforms that are wonderful. And I think it can have positive effects, but they come with major downsides, particularly since they're designed with money making in mind. I don't have a great solution for them, and I think it's outside the scope of my expertise, unfortunately. I'm hoping that my children's generation, and maybe other people in this room or that are listening will have better solutions that will make these sort of powerful tools available without so many of the downsides.
Thank you for speaking to that. That's a super valid choice. As a neuroscientist, I can certainly affirm that a lot of these platforms are really designed to keep us engaged, since that's, if you're not paying for it, then you're the product, that type of thing. So yeah, we all should be keeping this in mind as we do leverage, some of us, especially people who might not be able to spend a lot of time outside, like the internet is their main access point. So these really should be essential services that are protected for people, but the terrain is what it is today. So we should all do our best to navigate it. Thank you. I'm gonna ask a few more questions from my little list here, but it is almost time for audience questions. So please, everybody, think about what questions you might have for our panelists today. People on Zoom, you can already start submitting them in the chat. We're going to compile those and we'll have them ready to weave in with the other audience questions. Okay, so Ron. When it comes to having an online presence, there is the possibility for truly anyone to engage with the posts that you make. And I'm just wondering, how do you handle comments that are disrespectful or that contain misinformation, even if it's well-intentioned? And do you feel an obligation to respond?
Yeah, I would have an obligation to respond. I haven't actually had that experience because I guess my social profile is so small. But I've been pretty active on the internet for decades. So I've been blogging since 2003. I've had an email address since 1988. But yeah, I do think the internet's a tool that you can use to exactly magnify and amplify your voice. Yeah, I haven't really had much negative response to my internet presence. Sort of knock on wood that continues. Yeah.
All right. Does anybody else have any other thoughts on what to do?
I'll just say, I don't think it's ever gone well. If
Don't feed the trolls.
It's not worth my energy most of the time. Just block and move on. Yeah, it's better for my mental health. But kudos to everyone out there fighting the fight.
Do you have any additional thoughts? Okay, no, that's good. That's actually a perfect segue. So the last question, which I actually would love everybody to respond to if you have a thought to it, and then we'll start the audience question, is how, and I think I will start it on Wendy. How do you curate your engagement with the internet, writ large, so that your energy is not just expended, but also replenished?
Well, to be honest, most of the replenishment that goes on for my energy takes place offside the internet. So I guess that is how I curate it, by stepping away from the internet. But one of the big ways while on the internet to replenish my energy is actually through the fan fiction community. Mainstream media, it's getting better these days, but mainstream media still isn't really good about representing the LGBTQ plus community. And what with the queer baiting and the kill your gays trope, what representation there isn't always great. And fan fiction is kind of the place that you can go when the mainstream media isn't giving you what you need. And so that's where I can go and feel seen. Like I can read stories about people in my community. And if I'm not seeing those stories, that's where I can write those stories about those people in my community. And I feel like that gives me energy.
Awesome. Thank you. Does anybody else have thoughts on how to get energy back?
I have two modes to getting energy back. One is watching people clean on TikTok. Don't ask why. It's so therapeutic. And then the second one is really hardcore dog genetic Facebook groups, like very two opposite ends of the spectrum, but that's what really relaxes me on the internet.
Dog genetic people like debating about which type
No,
of
just
dog
talking about it and like putting up like really cool mutts that they found of like really cool coloring and then doing like embark DNA testing and talking about those results. So fascinating. Love it.
Got it.
Also horses and like cows and sheep sometimes get mixed into, but it's mostly dogs.
Different. Yeah. Okay. Very cool. Yeah. Any other thoughts from people on how the internet could be useful? Please.
I mean, I would say that, right, one of the sort of immediate benefits of the internet is being able to find communities of interest. And right, so for example, fan fiction community, I'm a big tennis fan, and I also do a lot of reading in genre fiction. And so I was just thinking about it as this sort of, as I was pondering this question, I think my most online interaction is on Goodreads. And so I use it to sort of find, new books that, or new authors that I didn't know about, and sort of to, interact with people who have also, absorbed the same fiction that I'm reading, and sort of to, share theories, et cetera. And that's how I sort of, that's my sort of enjoyment as I replenish.
Awesome. Thank you. I will speak for myself. That's something that I find really helpful is like podcasts, but also like shows or similar things that you don't actually have to watch it. It's mostly like you can get it by hearing it. Because then I feel like my body is freed up to like get off, to physically move away from the screen itself and to like do other things. And it's something that I have found helpful. Recently, I've been listening to like an ongoing like Dungeons and Dragons like campaign, which I've never played, but I just love hearing them like talk about it. It sounds like a really fun improv.
Which
almost.
one? I must know.
I will tell you later.
Okay.
Great. All right. Thank you, panelists. We now are going to invite in some audience questions. I have some, stacked away in case we need them. Are there any hands that want to go up right now? If not, oh yeah, please.
Hi, thank you all for being here today. This has been great. I had a question that I'll direct to Wendy, but of course it's for everyone. But just because you brought it up, specifically about conferences and places that have enacted anti-LGBTQ plus legislation. As we know, often the beliefs of individuals are not necessarily represented in the whole or in the governing bodies or whatever. So I'm wondering if y'all have any ideas about how we can possibly support individuals in those states, cities, spaces, while also, putting our foot down and not holding conferences there, or maybe being vocal about why that's happening, but still support the individuals in those communities that maybe are there not by choice. I'm just curious if there are any ideas there as to how we can sort of do both.
I mean, it's the first thing that comes to mind is like when we're saying we're the conferences, we're not holding them in these locations for these reasons. Also adding that we support any LGBTQ plus individuals who are living there, and maybe if there is money for the conference, to have like scholarships to bring the people who would have been a local conference for them to the new conference location. That's just a thought off the top of my head, maybe.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of thinking about this issue for multiple reasons. So one of the committees I'm on is deliciously named a subcommittee on policies on conferences and meetings in potentially discriminatory locales. And it's a joint committee between 3 math associations. And that the math community is very bureaucratic. So it's going to take a couple of years before that committee actually comes up with policies. But I'm actually doing my first keynote at a national math meeting, which is in Tampa, Florida. And so I've been thinking about, well, am I going to boycott or am I going to go and sort of change the title of my talk to Bleep DeSantis? Currently, I am going to go, and my talk is going to be about diversity, equity, inclusion in mathematics anyway. But sort of, while I was sort of, I'm on that subcommittee and also been exploring sort of what approach to take, I learned about something called socialoffset.org. It's sort of like Carbon Offset. It's a website where you can go if you think you're going to be sort of participating in a locale that's discriminatory. You can go to the Social Offset website and sort of give a donation, and they will have that money go to the locale to support people in the locale that was potentially discriminatory. So I thought that was a cool response. So social offset is one idea. And yeah, because I think it really is, it's a very complex question, because just saying that, oh, we can never have a conference in Florida again because Florida is a hellscape, means that, I mean, there's still, nearly 28 million people living in Florida that just because they have a lunatic in their executive mansion doesn't mean that those people shouldn't have access to the benefits and professional resources that a conference would provide. And so, for example, Tampa specifically, the Math Association that's having a conference there, they just sort of got a communication from the mayor of Tampa saying, yeah, come on down. A governor doesn't speak for us. So there's many different ways of sort of thinking about these issues. Yeah, so it's complicated.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
Yeah, it's great to hear about social offset. That sounds like a fantastic resource. Yeah. I would love to take more audience questions. Do we have any questions on the Zoom? I would love to hear one of those.
Excellent. So one question from Zoom is, one of the biggest issues I've struggled with is my same gender peers thinking I am attracted to them and being treated differently as a result. How have you dealt with this, or has this occurred to you?
Don't flatter yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's such an old trope that you come out as same-sex attracted. It's like, okay, so that doesn't mean I'm attracted to every person of the same sex. It just doesn't make any sense. And so I think just approaching it with logic and sort of turning the question on themselves. Well, are you attracted to everyone of the opposite sex? And if so, let's clearly there's a problem here. And right, so don't extrapolate your experience to my experience. That literally doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
Any other thoughts from the panel on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think responding with laughter is the appropriate one. I mean, it's laughable on its face, and that I think that the idea that a straight man can't be in the same room with another single female has been expressed by a certain prior vice president and presidential candidate now, that is justifiably mocked ruthlessly online. And I think this sort of taking these things to their logical conclusion, sometimes it's like, you're really saying this just so you know, and highlighting the discrepancies between how queer people are treated for the exact same things that their non-queer counterparts in kind of cis heteronormative society are, is a kind of revealing comparison to make.
Absolutely.
One quick note is that in cases like this, I always wonder if there's any kind of internalized homophobia, perhaps. And so I just wanted to voice that a possibility, but that doesn't change how it reflects you and your ability to feel comfortable with your friends if you're worried about this happening. But I just wanted to give that note.
Very good point. Thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna take this question first.
I'm kind of curious, given I, as an Indigenous individual, when it comes to metrics and data gathering, when it comes to how small a sample size of our communities are, also when it comes to funding, I'm in that hunting for grants mindset at this current stage. So I'm curious of how qualitative and quantitative data comes out through the work that you do, and equity, diversity, inclusion, and then perspective sharing, given that I'm going to make reference to Kat Anderson, who is a female-bodied, heterosexgendered scientist, who, when she wrote Tending the Wild about traditional ecological knowledge, she, as a woman, and she in the science realm, was totally dismissed when it came to her findings. At the same time, her book is like glorious amongst my Indigenous relatives, because finally Indigenous science and traditional ecological knowledge is presented in the material. And of course, Western settler science loves to dismiss, dyslexia, qualitative versus quantitative. See, dyslexia, I'm sorry. But I'm kind of curious when it comes to the metrics gathering, data collecting, small sample size, equity, inclusive perspectives, and whatever you garner from my inquiry. So not an exact single question.
Yeah, this has also occurred to me, like how do, like, especially among communities that are small or that are hard to find, people who might not, be volunteering themselves, like how do we do science on those populations in ways that are just, and that makes our findings known. Do our panelists have any thoughts on this question?
I have many thoughts. The LGBTQ community itself is a small community, and we don't. Well, at least I'll just talk about math. In math, we don't even have the data yet to know, are LGBTQ people underrepresented or not. There's a pretty obviously the number of out LGBTQ people is underrepresented in math and probably in STEM. And I do know there is work being done right now. Some of these boring committees to, for example, NSF, National Science Foundation, NSF is going to start implementing in some of its surveys will include sexual orientation and gender identity questions. But there's a whole there are task forces in the federal government that have been going on since I was in there, 2011, to try and get these kind of questions and this kind of data into federally recognized and used data by NCS and NCES and NCSES. That's, sorry, too many acronyms. They're from Education Department and NSF as well. But I want to talk specifically about the idea of sort of these small data sets and how to approach that issue when dealing with DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. I think the main idea is to not just take one lens that, ways to look at data, but there's also qualitative, right? When you're saying you're being inclusive, it's not about how many of a group are being included, but it's the idea that everyone is supposed to feel included. So to make sure that when you're putting policies in place, when you're planning events, when you're setting up resources and being welcoming, that the all word is used and articulated in a way that hopefully does send a message that all are included. That's what I think the I and DEI is about. So that'd be my response there.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts from the panel? I think that there's a lot, certainly, like statisticians have lots of informed opinions on like what are the numbers required to get like a p-value and significance in those senses. But that is only one way of knowing. And I think that, Ron, you also mentioned that. And so I think that we should keep open minds about all the things that we can learn from the studies that we have, and most importantly, how to broaden and increase studies that can improve our knowledge about small populations who are often minoritized populations. It's very important. I'd love to take a second question from the audience.
This is a question for Jamie. As an Olympian, how would you compare your experience being queer in athletics to your experience being queer in science, especially on the wake of lots of trans exclusionary legislation in sports?
That's a great question. I kind of alluded to this, but I was not out as an athlete. That said, the policies, trans inclusive policies, were a great joy to me when I was still competing. In fact, before my first Olympics, the International Olympic Committee had their first trans inclusive policy that specifically trans women can compete in the female designated category after 1 year of testosterone suppression. And that's a policy that I think has worked great, except for the fact that it's now being dismantled and has been used as a political wedge issue, and all of the sort of kind of Christian nationalist ideology has kind of co-opted it as this is an example of the decline of the white Christian nation, that transness exists somehow. And so I think that we had a great framework, and I was excited about that as someone who was a closeted trans person when that policy first came out. I considered transitioning and being an athlete after transitioning. That was considered too dangerous for my person to contemplate seriously. I have great respect for athletes now that are doing that. It's been almost 20 years since, I think it was 2003. So it's been 20 years now since that IOC policy has been promulgated. It's an incredibly interesting history of the inclusion of all people of differences in sexual development, as well as trans people in sport. That I think has had kind of a history that goes well beyond our current kind of political collective memory, insofar as that, if you look back at the Olympics of '92, when there were, very invasive sex chromosome testing in athletes that was involved disclosure of medical conditions to the international stage and how awful that was for the participants. Now, that seems kind of lost in our collective memory of the reason why these policies are essentially necessary is because the human race is incredibly diverse. And as scientists, I think we have an obligation to highlight that diversity and that breadth, and that use that as an antidote to the simplistic thinking that is being used to kind of score cheap political points.
Absolutely. And of course, it's always important to highlight the difference between the diversity of genders in our world and also the diversity of sex, which itself is not a binary. And all these things exist on spectrums and bell curves. And one clever idea that I heard about when I was a student athlete was the idea that actually most sports probably could operate in weight classes and don't necessarily need to be separated on the basis of sex. That's understood. Great question. Probably I'll ask if there's another question on Zoom. Several more. All right. Well, we'll get through all the ones that we can.
Another Zoom question. I'm finishing up my PhD in molecular biology. What advice do you have on picking a queer-friendly job environment, engaging a company's policy on their diversity and inclusion?
So it was how to find an inclusive workspace.
Correct. And how do you gauge a company's policy on how inclusive they are and if they value diversity?
Okay. I think one way is simply to see what they do for Pride. So there's a Google technique you can use to search through a company's entire website for a specific word and just search for that Pride. You can Google it. I can't exactly remember it, but you can just search for the word Pride and see if they have anything out there that's talking about anything LGBTQ plus related. But honestly, I think the most powerful thing is connections. We're going to come back to networking, of knowing someone at that company, at that institute, that you feel would honestly give you the feedback on whether or not you would feel comfortable there.
I'll also mention Out and Equal is another organization at the national level that it includes scientists also. So if you're a professional in science, Out and Equal might be a good organization to belong to. Often like employee resource groups might attend Out and Equal. They also grade companies, including an evaluation of their healthcare policies and things like this. So that's another resource too. You can look up, especially larger organizations, but I agree that asking someone in there is ideal, seeing if they have an employee resource group. These are great questions. Yeah. We have about little less than 10 minutes, so I think that we'll take another few questions. Are there any other questions in the room right now? If not, I think I'll take another Zoom question.
Another Zoom question. How would you respectfully refer to the LGBTQIA+ population? Would it be offensive to say queer community, or is it more appropriate to write out the whole acronym?
Great question.
I can only speak for myself, and I feel represented by any and many terms, but I also I don't have the experience. I would say you need a larger sample of, or maybe perhaps not even a sample, maybe a qualitative research into some people that don't feel represented by the term queer, or would prefer to have themselves represented in the kind of alphabet rainbow that we have. That said, I think that's kind of getting into the weeds a little bit, because I think that when you use any of these terms, you're clearly communicating an interest in being inclusive. And I think that's a good first step, no matter how you refer to people. That said, you need to ask around. I think maybe my panelists have some other ideas on that.
Yeah, I agree. I think the meta question of sort of being clear that I'm going to use this term to mean blah, 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 blah. I think that's basically the way to go, and then pick a term. I'm in favor of queer. And I know there's lots of people that aren't. Yes, I created a website before there was the World Wide Web in 1991 called the Queer Resources Directory. And I deliberately chose queer at that point. And there were lots of people who were not happy with that because reasons.
So me having been a part of putting together Out in Science in the years past, I will just say, even though it wasn't explicitly said, the choice to use these terms are from talking to people in the community and from really trying to engage whether they are appropriate or not. And so I just wanted to put that out there. The other thing is that I wonder if it's going to ever pick up momentum. And I don't think I can quite remember the acronym. Steph, you might help me out, but GSRM, is that the full acronym?
Gender and sexual minorities is a term that the NIH, I think, is.
Well, also romance or relationship, you said earlier.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I bet there's more letters in there.
Well, so, but it kind of just points out that it's like, it's talking about kind of an overall, instead of just saying LGBTQ plus and all those letters. I think referring them, and maybe minorities is not the right word, but I just wanted to throw that out there, is that there are other acronyms that perhaps people would feel comfortable, because I totally recognize that queer might be uncomfortable to people. I am comfortable using it and other people calling me queer, but I don't speak for everybody.
I think maybe our takeaway from that really important question that we talk about amongst ourselves all the time, in addition to what we just heard from our panelists about how it depends which community is being referenced. Is it the community within a certain state or within a certain nation or within a certain room or organization? All of those would inform who to ask, like what's most appropriate in that room. I think that, as we also heard, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be striving. And so that goes a long way. And I think that maybe the safe thing to do is probably to use one of these alphabet soup strings of letters. Queer is great, especially when used by people within the queer community, because queer is a term that has been reclaimed. It's important to be careful just so that it's not misunderstood as an epithet or something like that. But I would say that it all works. It's all groovy in general. Great. I think we can take one last question. Any hand in the audience? If not, we'll take another Zoom one. Oh, we have a question. Oh, we have two questions. You know what? I think we can probably do it. Let's try. Oh, in the very back. Oh, where's the second one? Is in the middle.
Hello, my name is V and I'm an intern from Gladstone, and I just wanted to know, what are the best approach towards networking and the platforms that you would recommend?
Please hop in, everyone. LinkedIn, that's the big one everyone talks about. Although I will say, that that's more for industry and academia. I feel like it's Twitter. I've heard Twitter referred to as Facebook pages for PIs, and I think that's quite accurate. And so those are the two. I mean, it's kind of weird to think about Twitter and networking, but honestly, I've heard a lot of people, especially in academia, use that. But I use those two resources to figure out to network. Yeah, I would say I'd never use Facebook or Instagram to network. That's like a no. Can you think of any other resources that would be good?
I would say email, because especially if you're trying to network within your institution, if you have a blank.edu and you're emailing someone else, I hope that they'll take it more seriously. I personally take it very seriously when I get someone who shares my email domain, asking me for a question or networking mentorship, like yes is the answer. Or it's not necessarily for, you get lots of emails from all sorts of places and you can't be everyone's network. There might be, I think there's a different connection when you're at the home institution that you can try cold emailing someone, and emailing twice and emailing a third time. That I think is reasonable.
And it won't go into spam.
Yeah, maybe.
Absolutely. In the interest of time, I think I'm going to ask for our last question, maybe we could talk about in the reception, but I'd like to begin to issue some closing remarks. So first of all, thank you everybody, truly everybody who put this together, who has attended in person, online, and in the future when you might watch this recording. So especially thank our panelists for being with us and sharing all this incredible advice. Huge thank you to Kanyon Coyote Women for the really fantastic land acknowledgement today. I just want to mention that this is the second year that we've worked with Kanyon. It's really important for us to build and maintain relationships, especially when working with Indigenous communities. If you also, ever organize an event with a land acknowledgement, I do encourage us to make lasting connections there, and not just rotate through people like it's a Rolodex, for those of you who know what a Rolodex is. Of course, thank you Gladstone and the LGBT Resource Center at UCSF for helping to organize this event and contributing to everyone who worked so hard behind the scenes. Huge shout out to Julie and everybody for working with us to pull this off this year and other years as well. Again, the recording will be available on the Gladstone YouTube channel. You can also follow Gladstone on social media to keep this conversation going. And you can specifically on Twitter find at Gladstone Inst is the handle. If you're here in person, please join us outside now for just in the lobby there for our reception. And just thank you everyone. Just really appreciate being able to join you here today. And I hope you all have a wonderful Pride Month.